Finishing up the final retro title of the Metal Gear series is Metal Gear Ghost Babel, slated as the handheld version of Metal Gear Solid by Konami. What the game was trying to do was tell a story similar to Metal Gear Solid, from location and scenario down to the characters, with a Metal Gear 2 interface. The gameplay is pretty standard for Metal Gear Solid, a requirement to stealth around everything with sparse enemies and traps to double their detection, because the combat in this game is familiarly horrible, since enemies will constantly respawn more dudes to whittle your health down and give you the attrition loss, and the animations just don't work and you'll end up getting pistol whipped by a guy who's 3 steps behind you. There's the puzzles returning of Nikita missile guidance, precision bombings, and card locks, along with a new conveyor riding puzzle that fell into the irritating randomness trap of not being able to tell where you're supposed to go and suffering consequences for trying to explore. The gameplay is well done overall and varied enough for several different approaches to be possible, and ultimately succeeded in emulating the same style of game that Metal Gear Solid had produced with its faults and its strengths. Kojima never fixed any of the game's big issues, and I can respect that because Metal Gear Solid was ultimately good despite them, and from the traditional top-down perspective we also get a hearty helping of the series' vague anti-war messages, except surprisingly Kojima Productions took the usual idea and spun it around to look at it side on, because instead of having the straightforward war is bad and there will be consequences beyond what you cannot see message, Ghost Babel looks at it in detail by dissecting the words justice and ideals, that as much as people want to believe in these things as black and white / good and bad, there's always the other side that isn't intrinsically evil. What society sees is never the true picture because it's written by bias, and the so-called justice attained to uphold these ideals is actually a fruity cover for some darker secret held off the presses. It's a variation on things are not always as they appear. This begins unraveling right out of the gate because Campbell finds Solid Snake living in Alaska and tired of his former life. He seems uncharacteristically depressed to see his longtime ally, yet he's convinced by him to get back to work by explaining that Metal Gear Gander has risen in Gindra and that it's being used by Gindran terrorists to take over the region and force out the peacekeeping forces. The area is being protected by the members of Black Chamber, a group of the most elite mercenaries in the world. The game presses onward through the Metal Gear Solid checklist further on. Colorful bosses with humanizing pasts, check. Horribly incorrect human dialogue, check. And finally, a sweetheart soldier ally for Solid Snake named Chris Jenner. No, seriously, check. The game's tipping point is the ending dialogue with Pyro Bison, where the reason for revenge is told to Solid Snake because apparently he's the one who caused this whole thing to happen. Somehow. Apparently what happened is that Black Chamber was sent in at the time Solid Snake was sent to Outer Heaven, and after he had destroyed Metal Gear TX-55 and the entire base itself, Black Chamber's actions were outed to the international media, and it destroyed their ability to perform covert ops, and because of that, Solid Snake is the actual bad guy. Nope, because Viper fills in the actual reason they're here is because after they were outed, their commanders considered them a liability, and a man labeled Anonymous had ordered the execution of Black Chamber, of which this group are the only 5 survivors. Now, they are working towards finding Anonymous because Viper believes that because Metal Gear Gander is involved, that there's absolutely 100% no chance that Anonymous will be able to resist getting involved in the scheme. Finally, after fighting General Augustine is when the real plot gets explained to Solid Snake, that everything happening in Gindra was orchestrated by Gardner, a top brass in America who was seeking to implant manageable chaos in this entire region. What happened was Gardner had led a mission given to General Augustine, who was working with America all this time, to head up the Gindra Liberation Front at Galuade, and later Gardner had orchestrated American peacekeepers to work inside of Gindra to oppress the country for the betterment of America through their resources and alongside the fight for independence. Gardner also set up conflicts between Gindra and its neighbors to kill off any sort of alliance forces that could stand up to his peacekeepers and further install America as the world's dominant superpower. What Gardner didn't know at the time was that General Augustine had contracted the defunct Black Chamber members to his help, and that he rebelled against his American handlers and became the genuine ruler of Gindra, seeking their independence using Metal Gear Gander as his trump card. but Gardner reworked his plan since another top brass official, Parker, had actually been heading up the Metal Gear Gander development, and if that project went out of control, then it would slide comfortably back into Gardner's jurisdiction, and of course he'd know that Solid Snake was saved today because he's obviously the legend. American society was probably told that the Peacekeepers were working towards justice in Gindra to the ethical ideals that society held them to believe. Yet in reality, all of this was put in place in order to funnel power and money back to America from the hands of innocent Gindrans losing out, and this is the ultimate moral of this game, and why I thought it was interesting, because it's a relatable message told in MGS3 conspiracy style, instead of just grand war is bad and you shouldn't do it, bad things happen. And that incredibly long explanation shows another problem with Ghost Babel is that the dialogue isn't just stilted and inhuman, but I can't believe I'm saying this, but Metal Gear Ghost Babel is the most repetitively told Metal Gear plot ever put together by Kojima, and that is bloody saying a lot. The writer of this game successfully went on in his career to eventually pen Fee's lines from Skyward Sword, because it has the same goddamn problem. Metal Gear Ghost Babel tells the player what the objective is every time the level changes, no less than 3 times in a row. No, I'm that serious. It'll beat you over the head with the obvious that many times. Yet, regardless, Metal Gear Ghost Babel was a bunch of locations and content, some decently done puzzles, and a surprisingly sober love interest compared to that of Holly White. Chris Jenner actually seemed halfway believable, and if you can get past some obtuse conveyor and Nikita challenges and a grading system calling you an idiot every time you finish a level, then I'd recommend the game for anyone who liked Metal Gear Solid and wanted to be sold on a more novel story like MGS3 did. Okay guys, next week we'll be moving on to something more contemporary with the PSP title, Metal Gear Acid. Another spin-off with an interesting gameplay style, and hopefully that holds up in the future, but for now, here's the scoreboard. And there's your victory for gamers. We'll see you around next time in 3 dimensions.